welcome to episode 4 of the Production Roundtable series. Today, I'm with George Mills and Michael Clary, and we're going to be discussing some questions about equipment. A couple weeks ago, we were with JB Machinery, and we were discussing some questions about dryers on converting equipment.
It's good to hear. We got a lot of feedback on that, I believe, Evan, and questions and very favorable comments from quite a few people. So are you planning on more outside guests like that?
Definitely. I've reached out to several suppliers and some customers as well, and it seems like there's a lot of interest in having visitors come on to the Production Roundtable series. So I think we should probably keep doing this for some time.
Okay. Well, keep you and I on our toes, George.
Absolutely.
That's right. All right, let's get started. So number 1, what steps to consider in evaluating a new productive change in a production line?
Well, I think particularly the key element is, and I take it, Evan, this is kind of for upgrades and upgrading part of a system rather than buying a complete new system. But as you look at upgrades, you got to really make sure and look at the entire system and understand what are your expectation and results, and making sure that you don't quickly run into another bottleneck in the whole system. And I guess there's no more critical place for that, George, than I would think in the corrugator, with so many elements to the corrugator, and many times people find that they want to consider an upgrade on the system.
That's really correct. In a corrugator, what you owe yourself to do is to do a bit of a time study. Doesn't have to be a full-time engineer study. Bit of a time study to show you where you're losing what you want in terms of production. And I use the word production because when you come to these upgrades, you need to look at them from 2 different sides. One side being productivity, the other side being quality. You naturally want both, but if your holdup is really, let's say, your cutoff, and you do a major overhaul to a single facer, you're not going to really see the better one coming out. So be fair in your analysis and find out where your bottlenecks may be before you actually pull the trigger, would be my recommendation.
Well, and
It's a pretty broad question because it seems like it would definitely apply to both corrugators as well as finishing equipment or converting equipment in the box plant.
Exactly, because the bottleneck could be, in terms of something, in terms of upgrading part of your finishing line, improving the printing or something like that, and you're going to do much better printing. And for example, if you really had some issues in your feeder and that was not properly performing, then you're really not going to get the quality upgrade or expectation you would think. Maybe that would print better, but you're not going to be in registration, for example, in terms of the level of your expectation.
Right. And then there's also the change that you're going to make versus the return on making that change to whatever system it is that you're going to do it to.
Yeah, and particularly, many times we find, it's like George's example on a corrugator, such a big piece of equipment, everybody's got a budget and capital is all tight. So you want to dig in the richest mines first, because your probability of everyone being on board to invest more in projects will be determined by your initial project. And even though, the equipment and your addition may be good, if you don't show some appreciable increase in speed or quality or both, then there's not going to be a lot of enthusiasm for your team and so forth to invest the next time.
Right. You have to have the justification there to proceed.
Exactly. And then just make sure, as George said, you don't get into a bottleneck, because you certainly have upgraded it, but you can't see it until other elements, because sometimes you may have to make a group of improvements together to appreciably move the needle forward.
Definitely. All right. Number 2 that came in, during machine installations, what are the key points to look for, and what should I be monitoring?
I guess maybe first, George, there's some front end pieces to think about too, even before the machine comes, that probably you need to, as an owner, consider.
I always recommend that people do what is called a pre-installation and analysis. Is once you have pretty much decided you're going to add a machine, get the specifics and see will your physical plant support those specifics. And at the same time, even if it will, perhaps pre-run. Like if you need a new electrical service, sometime when the machine is being built by the manufacturer, have the electrical service run out with a service loop in place. Same thing with the air. You can get all of this out of the way because it's the peripherals that tend to make you lose time on a scheduled installation. Something happened, something didn't go the way it was supposed to. And all the peripherals can be identified and can be accommodated, usually by regular maintenance people or whatever the case may be, in anticipation that the machine is coming rather than doing 15 different projects all on the same weekend.
And kind of George, on the same thought process would be is maybe at that pre-phase is bringing in some other suppliers that you utilize that will be impacted by the machine, like maybe ink or starch or printing plates or whatever it may be. So everybody's on board with the expectation of what you're trying to achieve and what the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, on that point with the pre-installation analysis, if you're adding a new machine or replacing an existing machine, and there's in-feed and out-feed already in place, it's important to make sure that the in-feed and out-feed to the machine will handle the speed and the output of the machine so that you don't create a bottleneck right from the start.
Yeah, as you say, Evan, just, you know, make sure your conveyors, your takeaway system will support the whole process there.
Right.
Now, thinking about once you start the installation from the owner's aspect, I think it's good to pull together the owner's team, probably maintenance, lead guys that will be operating the piece of equipment, because it's always best for them to be available to be a part of the installation because they learn a lot. They converse and they see various things going in, what is critical, what's involved, and things for them to be very aware of. Assuming the floor is all correct and all the utilities coming to the machine are correct. Most critically, in the early stages of the installation, you've got to be sure that machine is installed very level and very square because you can get inherent problems in that, particularly with high-speed machinery. And do things like, you know, checks and going through the protocol as you start up the machine. You know, first running it very slow, checking certain parameters of the machine to see that it's all behaving right, and then start running some product through the machine.
Yeah, one of those parameters that comes immediately to mind would just be to go by each section and make sure there's not excess vibration, just to check it with your hand.
Yeah, that's a very good one, you know. The other thing to think about would be, I always think it's a good item right when you're commissioning the machine and you're ready it's to be turned over to you as an owner operator, is do some critical jobs on that machine and maybe a fingerprint test and archive these, date them in the file, maintain them somewhere. And on a regular basis, it's always good practice. After so many months, you want to run those jobs again to see if you're able to achieve the same standards that were originally developed with the machine. And if not, why not? And there's a good test to run, like particularly after the machine has been run a while before it's out of warranty, just to make sure some incipient problem is not developing.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's, I think, also important to work with the customer as the OEM to develop a preventative maintenance plan during the installation and as the installation is being completed so that they have a clear path moving forward on what they're supposed to do.
Exactly, exactly.
All right. Number 3, how to deal with multiple suppliers for service support in one integrated production line.
Well, I think probably, Evan, on this, the biggest thing for the owner is he's kind of the manager in this. And even though, he may and his maintenance department may think they've got a handle on which area it is. All these systems are very integrated when you have a line, and maybe stackers are tied into die cutters or tied into robotic or pre-feeders of some type. And so you never want to assume the problem just lies in one area. So it's a good idea to be, as the owner or the maintenance chief, as representing the owner, kind of orchestrates the service. And even though it's primarily in one area, you feel it's good to give the other suppliers a heads up. You're going to be working on this, and who's your best guy to communicate over the weekend if we have trouble with it, because you don't want to assume you know how to do those things, because you could be creating another problem in their line if someone is not familiar with the other piece of equipment, because these kind of things. And then you develop kind of a team atmosphere, because if problems do develop and then it becomes unclear where the problem is coming from, you don't want people resorting to finger pointing. You want to get a team approach to problem solve.
Right. And George, you and my dad have been in the industry for far longer than I have, so you guys have dealt with this, I'm sure, in the past. But it seems like there would be a lot of importance in having connections with the other suppliers that are integrated in the same production line.
Well, I think you really need, Michael pointed out, a team approach to how you're going to do it right up front. I mean, even if you're the owner who thinks he's got the maintenance department set up and ready to run the project in terms of run, is you want everybody on board. One little trick that I have done historically is I have a concept that I call DABALL, DABALL. And what I do is I take a tennis ball on a major installation, and whoever is the king for the day, if I have to move over to a conveyor guy and he's taking the lead for the day, I give him the ball. And everybody knows what the ball is. This doesn't work for everybody, but it's something I've used effectively, so that you don't start finger pointing and get crisscrossed. Is who are we waiting on today is really what the ball is, but at the same time, it's who's the accountable person while we're all trying to get true to the common goal.
Yeah, the ball is a very good idea, but it is important that everybody works together towards the common goal so that they can all reach the ultimate end, which is a satisfied customer and well-performing equipment. So we can move on to number 4, which is what to consider when optimizing electronic software support on machinery.
Well, I think that one, Evan, the first thing that comes to mind on all new machinery is you want to make sure you maintain and have available and have your personnel well acquainted to using internet drops to machine side, so that suppliers can interface directly into the machine and communicate to the box plant staff on what they're seeing and get real-time feedback. And also, we've discussed, and I know you've been involved, Evan, in things where utilizing a lot of pictures and videos and so forth in a real-time condition, because that way, 99% of the time we can diagnose the problem without having to dispatch personnel waiting for days.
Right. It seems like most of the problems are electrical versus mechanical nowadays with the modern machines.
Exactly. And toward that end, and we talked about new machines going in and so forth, the importance of having backup software and make sure you've got the current version, because even if your machine's been in a while and you have some technicians in, make sure you get a fresh copy of the software so that you know exactly, because sometimes some models of electronic equipment change or whatever, and there are slight variations then in the protocol or the software. Having a current drawings, electrical drawings, schematics, because if you bring in an outside electrician, particularly to help diagnose something, he's got to really see what's going on, because he didn't design that equipment, but he can be an integral part in helping us do that. And the other thing is maintaining the records and the files you get with a machine, so you got good cross-reference to commercial parts and so forth, because then you can readily source items.
I was just about to say, most of the electronic and software items are going to be commercial parts. So having good reference materials will help a lot in being able to probably locally source some of these things if you have issues.
Yeah, exactly, because even if it's not the exact one, particularly with the internet and all, we can cross over and maybe find an acceptable substitute that a local supply has. Again, you're not waiting to air freight parts and all this kind of thing, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's important. And then, like you said, having real-time communication with a group of OEM engineers or technicians is really important too, because they can provide troubleshooting and feedback. And then, you know, most modern machines with an internet connection have a lot of remote diagnostic features anyways that can help with the troubleshooting.
Well, and one of the things, Evan, it's particularly your generation in terms of exploiting the social media era. Uh, those vehicles are very effective working with these kind of problems because people are in touch. We can create conversation groups and so forth, because if maintenance is working on a problem, then the plant manager can be wired into it. He may not be on site, but he's getting updates and messages. Everybody's real time then, and we can solve the problem much more quickly.
So let me ask you this, George and Dad, the future of service when it comes to electronic and software, where do you see that headed?
Well, I actually see that it will become virtual in the sense of what they mean by virtual today. Um, it'll be black box hardware based. Is take for example a PLC. Is you will use something along the lines of a BUD that'll have that entire program on it that you keep in a locker in your box plane. Your PLC goes crazy, the first thing to do would be to try to just reboot it, just like a computer. And if it doesn't get smart, then put the BUD back on the PLC and let it reboot again. It'll make the PLC think it was exactly like the day was made. That doesn't work in part of the chain. Then you just replace the PLC chassis with one from any supply center throughout the world. Plug in the BUD and boot it, and you're back in business again from the PLC side. There's no reason to have a PLC engineer sit in your factory for 6 to 10 days like it was not that long ago.
Especially in these times with the coronavirus.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, the other thing too, Evan, just what George is saying, if you really think about it, for years, you know, we've all seen the progression of service to automobiles and the modularity of it and the increased computerization and so forth. Not many of us can be backyard mechanics anymore with the complexity. So you're really hooking up diagnostic systems and isolating it to modules, kind of as George said, and you're rebooting them, giving them a couple chances to start. If not, I've got a bad module, you know. And so it really simplifies the case, but really makes you real time. And in the extreme cases like the military, you know, and we've talked, Evan, one of your brothers being in a naval aviator, seeing that firsthand sometime in our travels, that, you know, the service guys on that, it's strictly that real time, you know, accelerated 100 times with the urgency of their mission and so forth. They do just what George said.
Yeah, absolutely. So our last question for the day kind of goes back to the machine installation question, but it says, what items are critical in providing utilities to a machine?
Well, I think, you know, the thought process in those when I heard the question is new machines tend to take more power and particularly take more air volume, not usually more water, but more air, more power. And it comes back to George's thing, doing things ahead of time, sure you understand those in place. And the other thing you want to be conscious of is just saying you've got sufficient volume. Do you have it consistently? Because sometimes ghosty problems on machinery develop because there is inconsistency in the supply of those utilities, either in air, but the area that's very common is in power. Do we have voltage drops? Do we have different irregularities in that? And I think, George, you have told me about some of your experiences that are kind of crazy in this, because you get problems that seem to be never available. It's kind of like taking something to the repair shop and it will never create the noise. You can never see it when it's there, but it happens, and you can at least identify this, because there are some rather inexpensive monitoring devices that you can put on the utilities machine side to detect that and record it.
That's true. Is in my experience, I found that in many cases, if you drop below 106 volts, 107 volts of control power, commercial items tend to go crazy. They might not trigger as they're supposed to, but yet when the voltage comes back up above 107 to 110 or 111, they function fine. And this is why, as you mentioned, I think the world is coming to assure that you have sufficient volumes is start to monitor these things up front as part of your normal PM, and it will help.
And part of it, George, it's always good, when you have a problem with a piece of equipment and this problem is not familiar with you and you haven't seen it. The good thing to always think about is, what have we done different lately? Has there been something else going on that was changed that didn't appear to be unrelated, but something is happening? Because a lot of times, not every time, some other event triggers it, kind of like a utility or somebody repaired something else and they thought a new part was compatible, but it really wasn't quite compatible, type of thing. So it's always good, because it's much information if you can find out what has changed and what might be causing this issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with the ghosty electrical issues. But
everything, as I always say, Evan, everything happens on the third shift, So.
Seems to be, from people I talk to. But that wraps up our questions for the day. So thank you guys for joining me, and thank you to our viewers. I appreciate it. We'll post this video on YouTube.